We evolved to be more complex. We evolved to experience irrational drives, seeking the profound, as you say, to go against our own interests. This is what evolution leads to in its highest forms, not merely survival. So I wonder, even for a machine, even if it didn't necessarily just mimic its father figure and those archetypes, like I said, that are programmed into these machines, that there's this conscious drive that's sort of moving all these things in throughout history. Maybe that unconscious drive can be applied to evolution even, where this consciousness is pushing evolution not to survival of the fittest, not to a decentralization the way that Land talks about, but actually to even more amplifications and intensifications of the irrational.
People have this drive to like get to AGI, ASI, whatever it may be. Like, well, like really, what is the benefits of doing that? If anything, it could really like fuck us up. but we have this inherent drive to keep creating and pushing things forward.
Salvete Legionaries. I'm joined by a very special guest today. For those of you who watch my collaborations with Casey over at AGI, and now it's SI for president, you might have caught some of Moon's and Hues' appearances on our good friend Casey's channel. They've talked at length about artificial intelligence, the convergences with philosophy. Just briefly for the Legionaries, besides that work, sort of brief introduction, tell them what you're about.
Yeah, so I don't even know where to start. I lost my full-time job about a year ago in August 2024, and I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? So I started building out this Twitter, not persona because it's me, but this Twitter platform where I spoke about tech and philosophy, and I have kind of diverted from that, but like the whole premise of the page is to talk about the intersections of tech and philosophy, primarily focusing on consciousness. And how I used to describe it is, comparing and contrasting carbon-based neural networks to like human brains to silicon-based ones, so like artificial intelligence systems.
Yeah, and previously you mentioned obviously, learning to reach a AI winter soon,
Yeah.
and that we're going to reach a plateau. So what's your perspective on that? And maybe there's something from Chalmers that applies.
Funny enough, because when I had him, this was pre-ChatGPT. I mean, we still learned about LLMs, right? Because that was like an integral part of the discussion. I don't know where he stands with AGI now, but you're right. A lot of people are, like within the tech space are saying that we're gonna have an AI winter, or like the bubble's gonna burst, or however else they phrase it. And from my observations from engineers, some are saying that AGI is already here, right? Like whether it's kind of in the hush hush of certain like AI labs, or maybe they consider the tools that we're already using to be AGI, or at least capable of AGI is one thing, and others are saying that we're never going to get it, or at least not in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I'd say I'm somewhere in the middle where the sort of time frame that I've come up with, and this is very conceptual. I don't have any like hard evidence for this, but I'm thinking like around 20 years maybe. It really depends. It could be way sooner, could be later. But on my last podcast, I was talking to this guy, Essential Salts, Keegan over at the Nietzsche podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with his work at all.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so mainly he like covers Nietzsche, but now that he's like sort of done that for a bit, he's sort of branching out a bit, and we were discussing what might be necessary first of all for AI to have consciousness, and then a secondary question from that, obviously with like Nick Land's philosophy, a lot of that is that humans will become obsolete with the let's say acceleration of artificial intelligence, and we were sort of theorizing, let's say, and I want to get your thoughts on this, of maybe the saving power not only to reach artificial general intelligence, but also to make it not totally inhuman, is to give it some sort of sensory organ to interact with phenomena separate from just like these LLMs, which are obviously very limited in their scope of ability
Mm-hmm.
to, let's say, gather information. So what are your thoughts on that, being more on the end than like I am?
You mean like a physical body, like a humanoid robot?
Yeah, I guess in a nutshell, but not necessarily. Not doesn't have to be just a robot, but any sort of ability for
Mm-hmm.
these, I guess we call them machines, to experience phenomena in a way similar to like we do?
This is a very, very difficult question. This is because, I mean, how I perceive consciousness, I don't perceive it as mental processes or sense experience, which I do think that a lot of people equate consciousness to those things, right? For me, like sensory experience, consciousness, intelligence are all massively like different from one another. They obviously interact, but they're all separate things. And so I mean, for consciousness itself, I don't think that sense perception or sensory experience is necessary for something to have like a higher level order of consciousness. And I say higher level because I am a panpsychist, right? Being that I study under Chalmers, but I've always intuitively had this like panpsychist, I guess like ideals. And so I believe that consciousness is integral to everything. It's a fundamental feature of the universe. And so what does that mean, right? Like if and when a lot of people hear that, they're like, "Oh, so like is my chair conscious, for example?" Well, like maybe not in the like human sense that we perceive it to be, but the the very on the very micro level, like all of the atoms that compose of the chair are conscious to a degree. Yeah, so I think where am I going with this? Okay, so for an artificial intelligence system to be conscious, I think it has to have not sensory experience, but a complex enough brain or I don't know what like chip. I don't even know like what the exact like technicals are that allows it to that serves as an antenna to tune into higher level orders of consciousness that is akin to what humans perceive consciousness to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the sort of thing about the chair having consciousness sort of reminds me of like uppercase and lowercase being that Heidegger talks about, because kind of like what you're saying, like on a very granular level, any sort of configuration of atoms has some sort of consciousness in the sense that this is a energy moving in a specific direction,
Hmm.
and then there's higher and lower forms of that. So I mean, one thing I sort of come to the conclusion of is like consciousness is a spectrum, right? There's a spectrality to consciousness,
Yeah.
even amongst humans. I mean,
Yeah.
let's be honest. Are most people really like conscious in the sense that we think of? Yeah, but at the same time, some people are reduced more to inputs and outputs than, may I be so bold as to say we are if we're having this conversation, right? It's like one thing I thought of yesterday is that people who question whether they have free will or not have
Hmm.
more free will than somebody who just takes it as granted. And maybe
Really? You
I don't know,
think
maybe you
so?
just maybe, well, yeah, I think because if you are sort of theorizing whether you have free will or not, somebody who, like, let's take the average Joe in the street, maybe
Mhm.
from his religion he believes he has free will, but he's never really confronted or grappled with the
Mm.
concept. Especially in regards to religion, a lot of times you'll hear people saying, well, you just can't understand this, you can't understand
Mhm.
this thing because it doesn't work constrained to human understanding.
Mhm.
Contra somebody who's like actually considering this. Maybe I don't have consciousness, maybe I do. I mean, there's a lot of theories. I don't want to bog
Mhm.
ourselves down too much in this, but maybe we can sort of bring that back to, because like I said, I'm not super familiar with Chalmers. What did you largely get as an influence from him regarding your theories regarding consciousness, and then like how would you? I know you kind of have described consciousness, but maybe like more on an applicable scale, what are the sort of like main characteristics of consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, so in regards to Chalmers, two things that have really stuck with me that I mean, it's some of his like most popular arguments or theories is distinguishing between the easy problems and the hard problems of consciousness. And there's like a lot of debate around this. Some people think that his arguments are kind of like stupid, if I'm summarizing. Um, like, okay, so the easy problem of consciousness is like talking about or explaining cognitive functions, right? Um, and the hard problem is explaining why we have these subjective experiences or like qualia. Because I feel like there's no real way to scientifically explain qualia. I mean, I guess you can on like a very like when I'm perceiving the color red, for example. I guess you can explain cognitively how that works, but I can't explain the subjective experience of perceiving red, which is like the hard problem. And I think the second, I'm sorry.
No, keep going. I just thought you were done speaking. Keep
No,
going. Keep going.
and I guess the second thing I got from him too is he has like this zombie argument. I can't remember it exactly, but it's something about if someone were to clone you, like every physical part of yourself is cloned, that clone is identical to you. But they had no subjective experience. It was just like empty, like the lights were off on the inside. But from the outside, it seemed like they were conscious just like you. That's considered like I guess like a philosophical zombie in terms of like the consciousness conversation.
Maybe another sort of aspect of that as well is the ability to retain and then gain memories, right? I think one interesting thing. How are you familiar? Have you watched like the Blade Runner films?
I don't think so. No,
You haven't watched the Blade Runner films?
no.
Oh no. Well, that's all right. The Legionaries will have to forgive me for that. No, but
I
well,
have to watch it because I've been hearing a lot about it.
yeah, I mean, I'd say it's integral to this sort of these sort of conversations, and also Philip K. Dick, obviously who wrote the novel
Mhm.
um, that it was based on. I mean, he's probably one of the best science fiction writers, I would say. Granted, he went crazy towards the end of his life because he was just taking copious amounts of drugs,
Many
which
such
all great
cases.
writers have to do. Yeah, many such
Many
cases,
such
right?
cases.
Um, but I guess the reason I bring up Blade Runner is because one thing they try to do. So these replicants, right? Which are essentially these. They're stronger, smarter, enhanced. Genetically enhanced, and then also I believe they have some inorganic mix in there,
Mhm.
superior to that of humans. And a big problem is they only have a 4-year lifespan, and they sort of get into this existential angst of like, holy shit, I'm only alive for 4 years, and I'm basically a slave to these humans. So they experiment with implanting memories of previous humans so that they're
Mm.
sort of more grounded in reality. So
Mm.
I wonder if memory, not only the ability to accrue memory, but the ability to retain it, do you think that sort of is related to this, sort of quality of consciousness that we're discussing?
I don't think so. Oh yeah, I forgot to answer your second question was like how like what are the properties of consciousness? Like what do I consider the properties of consciousness? I've been having a hard time defining it exactly. It's more like I guess like an intuitive thing for me. But I guess if I have to really boil it down, I suppose I would define consciousness as something that has a reaction to the world around it, like maybe like electrons, neutrons, like everything from an atomic level has some sort of reaction, like physics-based reaction to its surroundings, right? But I still don't think that fully encapsulates like how I perceive consciousness. But I don't think
I
memory
guess,
has anything to do with it for me.
do you think it has anything to do with like higher consciousness? Because, to sort of store information, right? And then use that information to, let's say, further interact with the world. Because one thing that I've sort of come to believe is if you take
Mhm.
Nietzsche, for instance, and life affirmation versus life denial, you can kind of apply that lens to consciousness as well. Because, for example, animals
Mhm.
can only act utilitarianly in the sense that they can only act for their interest or the interest of their species.
Mhm.
Humans, for example, right, can act against our interests, sometimes in
Mhm.
very foolish ways. But that irrational aspect to me is a hallmark of higher consciousness. And to me, that's only possible when you can accrue more information and then, of course, pull from that information to either build or destroy or just interact more with the world. So I guess I'll reframe my statement and question to
Mhm.
from just consciousness to, let's say, higher forms of intelligence and
Yeah.
consciousness.
I think definitely intelligence. Because I was gonna say, I mean, before you explained more deeply, like where you're trying to get at, if the argument that you have to have memory in order to be conscious, from that argument, you can derive that like newborns are not conscious, because they don't really have much memory. They just have like, I don't know, a couple months or whatever, however long they've been alive. But I do think that the memory is kind of integral to a higher level like form of intelligence, right? And you can see that even with like very basic LLM systems, like Claude only recently had or gained the ability to retain memory. And I have noticed a difference in its performance pre and post getting memory.
Yeah, and even going off of that, I think one thing is funny with LLMs currently is, you know how like sometimes they'll make up quotes or something like that. Like I'll
Oh
go through like a
yeah.
200-page PDF and it'll come up with this like totally fake quote. But as that sort of ability to sort of sift through information and accurately pull from it, right? I mean, one of the things that I think in regards to, maybe the possibility of human capabilities growing as well is,
Mhm.
I mean, you look at somebody, or you look at the brain, for instance, and you think of it as like a data storage center
Mhm.
compared to maybe like an actual, data storage center for even artificial intelligence, like a repository. If we could have the instantaneous processing power that you sort of get with computing, or just that limitless, obviously it's not limitless, but seemingly limitless amount of
Yeah.
storage, um, to sort of elevate to a new
Mhm.
level of interaction, because I guess the way I'm framing higher consciousness does kind of integrally have to do with our ability to interact with the world, like I said, like whether it's
Yeah.
building or destroying or whatever. So you know I guess a question we could sort of get from there is, we haven't really asked the question, all right, what will it take for you mentioned the antenna of like sort of being able to be, let's say, I guess more on micro scale level, like the actual things. What are
Mhm.
actual things potentially with artificial intelligence that could lead it to this sort of slow trickle up to higher consciousness?
I think it's a little difficult for me because I'm not an engineer, right? So I don't know the exact like terminologies. Um, but again, it would have to be some sort of like really complex system with mass uh, data storage and memory. Even though that's not like memory is not for doesn't equate to consciousness. But for at least for it to be I guess like anthropomorph. I don't know how to say that word. Anthropomorphic,
Anthropomorphize.
exactly.
Anthropomorphic, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like consciousness. Yeah.
So you mentioned like panpsychism, and I'm sort of like very a surface level aware of like the general beliefs in it, but it is, I guess, if I were to sort of reduce it down to a simple explanation, and maybe agree or disagree with this, but you mentioned,
Hmm.
for example, like the chair does have a form of consciousness on a very small level. But you
Hmm.
also mentioned consciousness sort of being integral to the universe. And one thing I haven't really explored yet in regards to Chalmers is consciousness in the panpsychist perspective something that is sort of more a priori, or is it something that's more emergent
Mm,
from phenomena?
I think definitely a priori or priori. And it definitely like I think consciousness is not an emergent property, but rather um, material physical things are an emergent property of consciousness. So it's kind of like the reverse way of like most people's like thinking.
It's interesting because I guess I would probably be more in the emergent property perspective for my thoughts, but then at the same time, I think the question becomes, I mean, if you look at, for example, with Nick Land and the sort of idea of capital and technology having an unconscious drive, right? That may only come about through the material, but in a sense, the fact that it could exist as potentiality, maybe that's a sort of a priori pre-existence, in which case, maybe neither of our views necessarily need to be in contention. Because one thing I wonder, I mean, this is going to sound stupid, but it's like the chicken and the egg sort of
Yeah, I was
thing,
gonna say
in a
yeah.
way. Like if something has a pre-being, like a pre-existence and potentiality, is that
Hmm.
not a sort of a priori? And that's how I could kind of try to rationalize like the
Hmm.
panpsychist perspective. I don't know what you think though.
I guess a good way to put it is that I kind of perceive consciousness as synonymous to God, or a God-like entity that makes up everything and is the driving force behind material things, behind abstract thinking, behind uh, everything, honestly. And what really kind of solidified that for me is that I was watching this video of physicists and mathematicians talking about infinity, and they were saying that if you can somehow grab the entire universe and put it into a box somehow, um, it's going to go through like all the destruction and death that's coming from the future, but then it'll loop back around, and everything that is physically possible, like all potential outcomes, it will make, and it will just keep doing that infinitely. And so I'm like, okay, so like what makes it so that like the physical properties of the universe, if it were to be contained somewhere, which it probably is contained somewhere, we don't know, when as it keeps going, it just keeps generating like different possible outcomes.
Is that within the same like the same dimension, or is it in the sense, because I've heard like similar things where I think it was maybe it was Feinberg even, who sort of explored the possibility of like everything that could happen has happened on a specific like dimension, so therefore we don't really have free will, because like maybe even I didn't move my pinky down in like a different dimension, but that exact like our whole lives exactly as it is, except for that pinky thing, are represented. Is
Yeah,
that sort of what you're talking about, or do you mean more so within one dimension, all the possibilities are sort of being,
I think all
I
of the
guess
above,
created? Okay.
almost. I have to find the exact video and I'll send it to you. But
Mhm.
yeah, kind of just like that idea that the universe will create every possible outcome.
I think, I guess the way that I would take my version of that is I kind of subscribe to the sort of simulation theory, like we're in a simulation, because to me it's too it seems too optimistic to believe we're the first beings that are going to eventually lead to being able to run these ancestor simulations. This is a word I've heard like Giorgiani use, for instance, like, you know, because you can imagine even like a video game is a low form of simulation. You could get to the point where you're creating whole worlds for just one human avatar to interact with, but then everything else is created so complexly that it would essentially, equate to some high consciousness like you and I. I hope we have high consciousness. Maybe we don't. Maybe everything's pre-programmed. But, um, I guess what I'm getting at here is, is it the universe that creates every single possibility? Or does the universe give us the sort of potential to do that? And then it takes material things like us to bring about phenomena. Maybe you disagree, it seems, from the panpsychist perspective. That's how I kind of try to see it.
I guess like my not counter argument, but a point I'd like to raise, like what's the difference between the universe doing it and the universe giving us the tools to do it? Like, I mean, the universe is like ingrained in everything. Like everything is a universe and the universe is everything. So it's like I kind of see those two things as like the universe just doing it anyway.
Yeah, I guess it's more so is there a telos that is a priori, or is the telos like the ability to bring about different teleological ends, like that's there, right? Through like chaos, through like flux, and then out of that, we can sort of bring all these teleological ends to fruition, but then there's not like a pre-existent teleological end prescribed onto it. But like I said, I guess at that point it's just like nitty gritty
Yeah.
nitpicking. But I'm trying to remember. There was one thing I was going to bring up. That's right. So like Nick Land's Hyperstition kind of reminds me of what you're talking about, though through a different lens, because
Hmm.
obviously that's more like Skynet Terminator type. But, the idea of the future engaging with the present, then to influence the future. So I think that's kind of funny. And one thing in my latest essay I wrote about was, you know, you could see hyperstition leading to this very inhuman future. But I guess one area we can sort of bring this conversation is like I mean, I don't know about you, but I would prefer a non inhuman future, one where we still play some sort of evolutionary mode in whatever being comes about after us, where we're seen more as like fathers rather than just completely overtaken. So I guess my question for you in regards to this is like take hyperstition for instance. Um, I see it just as easily possible that machines could, if they were given specific abilities to accumulate experience with phenomena, that they could also see human irrationality, the sort of terrible aspects of humanity, which are also the beautiful aspects. And,
Hmm.
why would a machine necessarily sort of become this decentralized, inhuman thing that Land talks about? Do you think there's any possibility that if we gave the machines specific frames of being where they could experience phenomena, that they would sort of want to emulate certain aspects of us instead?
Yeah. I guess like the first question I have for you is like, how would you define hyperstition?
So I guess I would define hyperstition. Well, I'm going to try to take Land's example, I guess, but I guess there's two ways to look at it. There's one where it's like fiction creates reality, and we have these like maybe like or take something like the Matrix for instance, where we're coming up with the movie The Matrix. Maybe in the future there's like this unconscious drive to bring that in fruition. And the other way I view hyperstition is, I guess it has a time travel element where the future. Okay, I don't. It's kind of difficult for me to even try to understand because I don't completely understand it. But the future kind of engages with the present and the past to bring about a specific future, and that could either be taken literally or conceptually. I would say it's like there are unconscious drives to things, and there's a conscious essences in the Heideggerian sense that do operate beyond just like human interaction with those things, like capital and technology have a drive that can be more powerful than human drive, and that to me is also hyperstition, because that unconscious drive, which has potentiality in the future, moves the present towards that future. I don't know, and if that's not the right definition.
No, I do think there are various different, I guess, like sub definitions of hyperstition, but the way that I would like really boil it down to is consciousness creates reality, right? So, an example of that would be like mimetic hyperstition. This is like something we talk about a lot on like E-Acc, Twitter, X.com, whatever. Where like through memes, we can make our ideals come to like physical fruition into like our like life in our life, right? And so and that's an example of like consciousness creating reality. Or another way is like superstitions, right? Like if you're seeing like the Matrix or like any other kind of like sci-fi film, that's kind of that is like consciousness like making things come into reality. And another way that I've seen people describe is kind of like calling it like a mind virus that makes things play out, whether it's like from the present forward or the future backwards. I don't really know the differences there, honestly, if you really want to think about it. But um, and then you were saying if we were to give machines like a phenomenal experience, would they want to be like us? I think I actually posted something about that earlier, where I noted that in various sci-fi media, the the like AI, artificial intelligence systems, particularly robots, it's usually the case. They seem to have some kind of urge or yearn for like love and meaning and emotion, stuff like that. Things that are a bit more profound, that are completely irrational and serve no real purpose for a silicon-based machine, but they still have that yearning for it. And then I got a lot of arguments in response to that, saying that it's because these machines are trained on human data, and so it's I guess it's kind of like if you see your parents doing something, you want to do it too, even if you don't necessarily understand why, right? Like, and then with that, you also have their DNA, and I think there's also an argument to be made that since it is trained on human data, that like AI systems have human DNA. It's just like made up of like human information. And DNA is just like information, right? Um, and so like how much of it is like an actual intrinsic yearning versus um, just taking your genetics and like wanting to mimic after your um, ancestors, predecessors.
Now, I think it's a great answer, and this is largely the sort of question that I'm confronting, and like I said, my last essay. And Blade Runner is a great. You got to watch Blade Runner because it's like it perfectly encapsulates, sort of what we're talking about here. Um, and it's interesting because so the title of my essay is "More Human Than Human," which is the Terrell Corporation's motto, and they're of course who produce these replicants. And what's interesting, something Jason Georgiani points out, is that Terrell might, Eldon Terrell, the owner of this company, sees modern humanity. Of course, it's 2019 in their time frame, but it's probably going to be more like whatever 2050 would look like for us. But um, he sees an inhuman population that's like addicted to all these different vices, that's sort of reduced to inputs outputs, and he's thinking, I want to create a new humanity that is more human than human, that takes all these things you mentioned, irrationality, a yearning for the profound, for love, and birth that into existence as a sort of Oberman Ubermenschen sort of evolution. So that there's that one aspect of it, but then what you mentioned is, is it just trying to mimic its ancestors, its father figures, right, as a sort of continuity of archetypes, which either explicitly or implicitly are programmed into these machines? And I think that's certainly a big aspect of it. But then we also have to look at how evolution takes place over time. And the way evolution takes place, I think, does support my sort of idea that it's not just a mimetic, because Darwinian's theory of evolution is insufficient to describe the specific movements towards higher or lower beings, because of course there's a little bit of mixture. Sometimes animals evolve to be fitter, sometimes they don't. And you take a tardigrade. You know what a tardigrade is? I use this in my essay. It's this little. It's so cute. If you look up a tardigrade, it's like the cute. It looks like a little Pokemon, um, but it's this very
Oh yeah,
small.
the
You know what I'm talking about?
the bear. They call it the little
Yeah,
bear.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Cute little bear. Those things, if there was ever a nuclear war, those things would probably survive because they're one of the most survivable organisms. But we don't evolve to be those. We evolve to be more complex. We evolve to experience irrational drives, seeking the profound, as you say, to go against our own interests. This is what evolution leads to, in its highest forms, not merely survival. So I wonder, even for a machine, even if it didn't necessarily just mimic its father figure and those archetypes, like I said, that are maybe implicitly sort of programmed into these machines. Maybe there is even is interesting. Maybe we could relate this to panpsychism. You say that there's this conscious drive, right? That's sort of moving all these things in throughout history. Maybe that unconscious drive can be sort of applied to evolution, even where this consciousness is pushing evolution not to survival of the fittest, not to a decentralization the way that Land talks about, but actually to even more amplifications and intensifications of the irrational. And maybe maybe that's just me being very naive and anthropocentric, since we brought up that word earlier. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
That's a good question. I had so many different thoughts. Let me gather myself
Take your time.
because you had so many good points that I wanted to address. But I guess like to address the last one because that's like the one that's like top of mind. I see consciousness as very neutral, and I could be wrong. I am I don't know if like religious is the word, but I do have like a strong faith in God. And I do perceive God to be a neutral entity that just um, allows itself, or not allows itself, but that makes up of everything in the universe, and through it things come about. Because I don't want to say that that God allows us to come up with things. So I do believe that the same way that I believe everything's inherently conscious, that we are all God and God is everything. And so like there's no real difference between my definitions of God, universe, and consciousness. Right? And I do think that this neutral force, consciousness, God, whatever you want to call it, its entire motivations, which I don't know if it's so neutral, but from my mind, its entire motivations come from, I don't know if advancement is the term, but rather creation. right? And and so I do perceive this God or conscious whatever to have made carbon based beings like humans, not because it's the most uh, fit for survival, like we were talking about, but rather because we have the capabilities to bring on the next step in evolution, which is silicon based beings, right? If you believe in God for the most part, you believe that you're modeled after your creator, and if we are modeled after a creator, therefore we are creatives ourselves, and that's why we have this like it seems like people have this drive to like get to AGI, ASI, whatever it may be. Like, but like really, what is the benefits of doing that? If anything, it could really like fuck us up. But we have this inherent drive to keep creating and pushing things forward. I don't know what that's about, but like I guess like when you were talking about like the future and what that looks like, I really don't know. I just think like whatever intelligent beings that are existing will just keep wanting to create whatever that looks like. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the only point of disagreement I would have is that I see what you equate to God, I would call chaos, and that's sort of my ontology. Because I see, so like, I don't know if, because we've talked before, obviously, I don't know if I mentioned before my sort of allusion to Hesiod's theogony. Did I discuss that with you at all before? So Hesiod's theogony is the closest thing to a sort of or not the closest thing. There's a few different iterations, but it's one of like the creation myths for the Greeks, right? The Hellenic pagans. And in his theogony, he mentions that the first being in the universe is chaos. And out of chaos, you actually birth Gaia, the earth, and then Tartarus, the underworld. And then Gaia and Tartarus birth Kronos and the Titans. And of course, we know the story. From Kronos, you get Zeus. And this is just a fun little fact, but the whole sort of edible complex that they try to talk about through psychoanalysis largely comes from this sort of prehistoric, primordial, like father fighting against father, needing to defeat a tyrannical father figure. This is something Essential Salts brought up in my last podcast. But anyway, then Zeus comes out of the Titans. But what we see here is not a preordained teleology to where these things are going, but chaos, disorder, right? Even, in regards to the way that organisms come about, at least from my perspective, it's from disorder. It's from these different particles randomly bumping against each other and then taking on new forms over time. And those forms eventually develop in consciousness, right? And eventually you can intentionally, because obviously the intentionality of a plant is minuscule. A scorpion is much more. A rat is much more than the scorpion. And then, of course, we get to humanity. But to me, chaos is like the logos. The logos is chaos. It's not preordained. It's not teleological. It is fluxed. But out of that flux are a million different possibilities.
Hmm.
Have you read Dune, for instance?
No, but I watched the movie.
All right, that works for now. So you know how in the movie he can see like different futures or whatever, and he has to pick one of those futures. That's kind of how I see chaos. Is there's millions of different futures, right? And that future could lead to us humans, but it'll also lead to this weird, like something like a human, which is of higher intelligence, but could even be a different. You mentioned carbon and silicon-based life forms. It could be something totally different. But chaos is what being derives itself from. So I agree with that, pretty much everything you're saying. Just for me, instead of God, I would equate that all-encompassing logos to chaos. You know what I mean?
I think these are like different words for the same thing. It's like I don't have like a Judeo-Christian perception of God as it being like Sky Daddy. Uh, but more so just perceiving it as like the force behind everything. And I thought of a few things as you were speaking. How I guess like clarity comes from chaos, or yeah, almost it's like pretty much like the premise, right? Like clarity comes from chaos. I don't know how exactly I made this connection, but I think of like Nietzsche's like Birth of Tragedy and him talking about the Apollonian Dionysian, right? And how Dionysian is kind of like that primal kind of like disordered sort of I guess like force. And but with that you also get the Apollonian, which is like I guess you can equate it to like the higher level orders of consciousness, the more like sophisticated human above human. And I think those two forces are necessary, right? I don't think that without chaos or things synonymous to it, um, order can come about.
No, I totally agree. And one thing that one of my favorite philosophers I sort of discovered this year was George Bataille. And largely what he talks about is an economy can't be reduced to science. You can't reduce an economy to science because economy needs to be driven by, like we've been mentioning this whole podcast, the irrational, right? Non-productive expenditures. When you just try to create a science of everything, and you reach that limitation of like, all right, we've reached the threshold of what we need to do, you're going to boil up inside and you're going to explode, right? And that's sort of what he's describing in the accursed share, especially in regards to capitalism. And I think Land, who previously was very influenced by Bataille, when he talks about this unconscious thanatos, death drive of capital, I think it's tied to that as well. And
This
sort
is
of what you're
this is
saying
like
here.
it's like the
Yeah, feel free
invisible
to kind of.
hand,
Yeah,
from like Adam Smith's invisible hand. The capital has some kind of like unseen force that like drives it and makes things happen. That's why we can never like really boil it down to a math or a science.
absolutely. I guess that is, I never thought about it that way because I've always just thought of the invisible hand in a very pragmatic way. Like, okay, we need the roads, we get the roads. Um, but yeah, I mean, it really is. Again, we could sort of, bring consciousness into it. It is this unconscious conscious. Well, I guess to be unconscious, there's consciousness in that. To be called unconscious, it is a sort of consciousness because it's a drive, right? It's just not an intentional order drive. It is like this sort of, what's interesting. I don't know. I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting in a little bit of a tangent here, but when I view Nick Land's machine, it's both incredibly Dionysian and incredibly Apollonian at the same time because the whole machinic process seems Apollonian to me because it is a sort of a set of inputs and outputs, just very complex circuitries. But then at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, um, there is this like unspokenness, this drive inherent in it, which is very Dionysian. It is very frenzied and like literally self-destructive.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's like I guess one another common theme I guess that's been coming up in our conversation is like, is there really a difference to these things? And it's almost like the Apollonian, the Dionysian, sometimes manifest in extreme ways at the same time. I don't know. You kind of brought up a bunch of random thoughts that I haven't fully fleshed out yet, but I think you get where I'm like sort of saying.
I think the more that you dive into these topics and debate over semantics and nitty gritties and whatever, I feel like the more, at least for me, I realize that everything is one but the same. Like everything is kind of the same, but use but in different words. Does that make sense? Like you were saying, like, oh, when I talk about this, I realize that it really isn't too different from this thing. And I wrote an article about consciousness in which I described, or I spoke about the Tao and how I saw like one side of the Tao or the yin yang like symbol as like I think consciousness, and the other side is matter. But really, those are, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing, but we kind of just like make that distinction. And I think that can be applied in many such cases.
Yeah, I guess one thing that sort of comes up to me though, and I guess my caution for that would be, difference. I think, there's like, for example, there's a difference between Hegel's dialectic, which is like a sort of synthesis of opposites into something new and cohesive, which then ends up becoming a sort of transcendental value. Whereas, you take Gilles Deleuze, for instance, and his concept of positive difference, where, well, these different things don't necessarily have to synthesize to, to something like that actually is of any like transcendent value. And I think it's important to make that distinction because I totally agree with you, by the way. But even in regards to the Apollonian, the Dionysian, I think it's important to avoid, I guess, overvaluing that as a dialectic, because I think Nietzsche early on because that's his first book as well, is he really is almost making a somewhat Hegelian proposal with that. But then as he goes on, he starts to see them as more of these nominalizations. And I think if we see these things as nominalizations, that, all right, this is going to sound weird, but I guess like you can't attach a transcendental element to them as different things, but you can't also attach a transcendental value to them being one thing at the same time, if that makes sense. Like I think it's important to nominalize it. I don't know if that makes sense. I know it's kind of just saying words at this point, but do you sort of get what I mean?
So, what is the argument as to why you cannot assign like a transcendental like meaning? Like, I
Because
didn't
I
quite get that.
So, for example, with the Hegelian dialectic, you have two opposing forces which synthesize together, derive meaning through each other to end up becoming this sort of value or moral. Whereas Deleuze would say, okay, these things don't necessarily need to synthesize. Each thing is positively its own. Because if we try to constrain everything to one, like for example, in like Hinduism, the idea of the Brahman, all things come out of the Brahman. I don't like that because it takes away from, I guess, like, because to me difference is precisely the beauty of existence, is that there's these different beings with different wills that clash against each other. And it's important to make like a positive distinction of difference without while also realizing that we can mold them together nominally, and like we could see nominal synthesis, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I guess like intuitively speaking, when you talk about like different beings with different inherent drives, I think of almost like male and female, right? Like I do think that we are distinctly different in many ways, and we're figuring out more and more so how we are different, right? Because I think a lot of people might believe that men and women are the same, but with just different like reproductive parts, which is absolutely not the case, right? But we still like come together, and from these separate beings, we create something else, and I think that can be said for like most things.
I totally agree. And I think one of the things I came up with, or I don't know if I came up with it, but one of the things I've
Hmm.
said recently is we need an axis of being. And what I mean by that is if we just try to be everything, like for example, you ever watch Black Mirror?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you remember that Black Mirror episode where it's those two guys who are like old friends and they meet up and they play a video game and they have sex in the video
Oh
game?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was like super disturbing to me. But this is exactly, I guess, how I describe my axis of being. This guy, because he could just become a woman and have sex in a video game with a guy, like who's an actual guy. Like he can't. There's like a scene where he's like trying to have sex with his girlfriend. And he can't get it up because now he's just thinking, about him being a woman in the video game. And if you don't have an axis to be in the world, something that is not static but is something, like you can't just be everything. Like you talk about male and female, I think there is an importance to the archetypes, and even biologically also. But I guess the archetypes of male and female do play a very important role in synthesizing and creating something more beautiful, not just biologically, but also in the sense that your mode of being in the world is different, and that's a good thing. Whereas if you try to just, like, I guess the androgyny of the left, for instance, is something I'm very against, because it is a great leveling force. Because the idea being that if you can create one sort of indistinct organism, then there's going to be no conflict between these indistinct organisms. But conflict is good. Conflict can be positive. It doesn't just have to be violent conflict. But if it is, that's necessary too. Um, but you look at like some of these like leftist gatherings, and you can't really tell the difference between a man and a woman. And it is because they want to get rid of that Nietzschean pathos of difference, from which beauty out of inequality derives itself from. And again, that's another thing, I guess, about my philosophy is I'm very like pro inequality, just not institutionalized inequality, but natural inequality in the sense that, like, distinction is what grants us beauty.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I guess you're saying like not like systematic inequality, but inequality that's appropriate or it's like matches like whatever it is that you are. I don't
Your
know.
capabilities, because like obviously if you try to create a feudal system, there's going to be some guy who's like a middle class dude who could probably lead better than the king, but because of that institutionalized inequality, it's actually a form of equality, because it's no different than like DEI. I mean, in a sense where you're just like you're keeping somebody at this level of, I guess for me, I want a more fluid, like a true aristocracy means rule of the best, which is unequal, but it's like nature where there's no institution stopping the strongest organism or the smartest or the most beautiful organism from expressing itself. So that's my inequality, naturally occurring inequality.
One thing that I can't remember what we were talking about earlier, that I wanted to bring up was, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't Nick Land say something about how like capitalism is a like alien consciousness
I can
ruling
pull up
whatever it is
a
we're
quote.
doing?
I think I put it in my essay. Keep going, but I'm going to try to find it really quick because I think it's in my essay.
I can't remember what we were talking about. I think they were talking about like the future, or like, and we were talking about capitalism and how things drive the markets. And I never quite understood his argument for how capitalism is kind of like of not an AI, but like an alien intelligent force. I don't know.
Here, I have the. I don't know if this is the quote you're thinking of, but it has alien in it. I use this in my essay, but he's talking about the death drive, which is sort of synonymous with capitalism because he thinks capitalism has this inherent death drive. But this is from, I want to say, Machinic Desires, an essay in Fang Numina. Anyway, the death drive is not a desire for death, but rather a hydraulic tendency to the dispensation of intensities. In its primary dynamics, it is utterly alien to everything human, not least the three great pettinesses of representation, egoism, and hatred. And there's a little bit more to it, but I think that's the relevant part of the quote to what we're talking about. And I guess what he's saying is that, you know, when we talk about an inhuman future, for instance, right? Capitalism to him is a deterritorializing force in the sense that it gets rid of all nominal assertions of value by humans, which, by the way, I think are integral to our meaning. I'm sort of like a positive existentialist in the way that I think we have to assert nominal meanings onto reality. But essentially, what he's saying, and you know, for the audience, it's very important that you recognize that Nick Land's ontology is actually very leftist in the sense that it's derived from Deleuze and Guattari, who were post-structuralists. And the post-structuralism, right, essentially is trying to deterritorialize all these nominal assertions that you get traditionally from like religion, culture, you know, nation. Even I guess nation is low key sort of a modern construction, but you get what I'm saying. And then like the Deleuze and Guattari would say, well, capitalism deterritorializes the traditional structures, but then it re-territorializes through new identities that come out of a sort of financial society. Like, you know, in Fight Club, you have the IKEA nesting instinct. You know, the dude just buys furniture, and that's his existence, that's his identity is furniture. But then Nick Land says, well, actually, it goes back to deterritorialization because it levels everybody, because it feeds into all the worst desires of humanity. He talks about like the finance bro cokehead who just becomes a drug addict, no different from a bum, right, who's also doing drugs, because it creates these new desires that need to be fulfilled within capitalism. Capitalism eventually won't be able to fulfill the desires that creates. Kind of like the antidepressant situation, right? You get depressed, you get the cure, it causes more depression, you need another cure from that, and you just end up in this samsara medication. That's a little bit of a rant, but I don't know. Does that sort of answer your question?
No, that makes sense. I can't remember his exact arguments right now, but it kind of feels akin to what I've read about in Mark Fisher's work. I believe it's Mark Fisher. He talks about, let me just
Yeah, I think
confirm this.
so.
It's in
Because he was a
Capitalist
big,
Realism.
yeah, he was a big collaborator with Land.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's a leftist. He's like, or a Marxist
Yeah,
maybe.
he is. I don't know if he's a
Yeah.
Marxist, but I know that he's definitely
Mhm.
like yeah, without a doubt a leftist. I would call him probably more of a post-structuralist leftist, but I don't know enough about
Mhm.
him. That's just from the limited stuff I know
Yeah.
about him.
I think, if I'm not getting it wrong, he says something about like capitalism will keep destroying, I don't know, will keep causing destruction until, I don't know why. I can't remember exactly what the end like conclusion is there. But it feels akin to like what you're saying about like Nick Land. But yeah, yeah, they did work together. You're right.
Were they in the CCRU together? I think they were. Does it say that? Whatever you have up right now? I don't know. I can look it up too.
I
But
don't I don't think so,
let
but
me
I could be
see.
wrong.
Okay, yeah, he was with so
He
Sadie
oh
Plant,
shit.
Mark Fisher, Nick Land. And for the audience who doesn't know what the CCRU is, it's a Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, and it was essentially this like, I don't know, would you call it a think tank? I don't know what I'd call it. They were all academics at Warwick.
I guess like a movement.
Yeah,
I
I don't
don't
know.
know.
We don't have to call it anything, but it's something.
Yeah,
It's an
yeah,
entity of it's a it's a collective, y'all. You know, they just come together and they talk about things. No, but yeah, I mean, I'd say most of the people that actually come out of the CCRU are leftists. But like I said, Nick Land's
yeah.
ontology is a leftist ontology. With I mean, I don't even know if Nick Land was necessarily right wing until he started working, off of Moldbug with the Dark Enlightenment and all that stuff. Because that's really when you see him talking about.
I'm
Um,
unfamiliar.
so like around 2004 is when I think he
Hmm.
went to Shanghai, because obviously he had
Hmm.
his falling out with the people at Warwick, and then he went to Shanghai and Mencius Moldbug, now Curtis Yarvin, started writing his blog Unqualified Reservations early 2000, basically critiquing democracy, and then Nick Land critiques democracy because he actually sees it as this anthropocentric roadblock to acceleration, coming about. Now, granted, Land has definitely changed his views a lot since Fang Numina and like that early sort of capital death drive stuff. So I don't even know necessarily if he still believes so strongly like nothing human will survive the future. I'm supposed to be talking with him soon, so I can clarify that perhaps. But I forget why we brought that up, but maybe you could bring it back. My mind's going
Oh
different places.
no, yeah. I We're talking about the future and what that looks like, and markets, and then we were talking about Nick Land, and that kind of just reminded me of Fisher, and then we kind of just tied Fisher back to Nick Land. I am curious that like what do you personally think the future is going to look like?
Well, if this is going to be assuming it's not Nick Land's future, because then I can't know at all what that future might look like. But I'll give you my alternative vision, let's say. And this is going to sound stupid, but or not stupid, funny, a little bit crass and vulgar. But I've been coming up with this term that I brought up in my last podcast called Gooner Accelerationism, and it's essentially this idea that with like virtual like VR porn, these sort of things, most of humanity is going to be kind of reduced to these matrix type simulations because they're going to want that over reality. Especially, it's going to be cheaper, right? Like the cost of living could go up astronomically, um, and also you
So
could
it's
this
cheaper to have like an anime GF than like a real GF.
yeah, low key. But like that's already happening now. You see, these people are falling in love with ChatGPT. They're falling in love with. I mean, with these simulations that you're going to get in like 20 years, I think you could very easily come up with simulations where you can create new consciousnesses within those simulations that actually fall in love with an avatar user. And at that point, they're going to want to live in real life because their simulation is going to be 100 times better than what they could achieve in real life if they work that hard. However, people that do seek the irrational and seek the anti-utilitarian, the non-productive, will want to be a part of the real world. So it's going to be this eugenic process where like maybe 1%, less than 1% of the population is like, okay, I'm not going to get caught into Gooner accelerationism. I'm going to retain my agency and exert my will onto the world. Be part of the architects who are going to move humanity forward. Like hopefully I can do. Hopefully I don't get caught into Gooner accelerationism. But yeah, my I wrote about it briefly. Well, not briefly, but in my book Dreams a long time ago. Old book, very experimental. But most people in there live in these simulation centers where they just they brain fuck themselves with super good simulations. But um, TLDR, yeah, that's kind of what I'd see.
We call it Gooner Accelerationism. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, I figured that was catchy.
I think that's like almost like a byproduct of capitalism. If I'm being completely honest with you, I just thought of I had this uh, person that I know, a young man. He's 21. He refuses to get like a white collar job or go to school because it's all matrix shit. According that's like his terminology. It's all matrix shit. And I was really thinking about that recently because although I understand the argument, and yes, like these email jobs and going to school for the most part really is like matrix shit, right? Like a lot of it doesn't really make sense if you really try to like think about it. But I do think that like porn or like endless scrolling, like short form content, that is that I think that's like more of a matrix shit than like trying to better yourself via the matrix. And I think like the higher forces that be within the capitalist system want you to be like a gooner essentially, and like in the consuming content essentially, or consuming, just consuming period, all day. um yeah, so I do think that's like kind of like a byproduct of capitalism.
Yeah, I completely agree. But the reason I attached the term accelerationism to it is because I actually don't see it as a negative. I see it as a positive because, like I said earlier, I don't think most people really have higher consciousness. And if you're the kind of person, I'm serious, but like if you're the kind of person that's going to fall into Gooner accelerationism, you're probably also not the kind of person that's going to meaningfully contribute. And you know, like the Pareto principle, for instance, like 20% of the population does 80% of, or does the same work as 80% of the rest. I think it's
Yeah.
way more than that. I think it's like 1 to 99. It's like, and it's like the opposite of Marxism.
Mhm.
It's like if Ayn Rand was a little bit less retarded, she could have like said this better in Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah.
Not to throw shade at her, I'm sure she's fine, but what I'm getting at here is like I think this is something we should actually just ride the waves of. And for example, you're totally right with people who want to push this because look, did you hear about? I don't know if they're going through with it. You heard about like that city in Saudi Arabia that's supposed to be like this
I know what you're talking
giant metal
about.
thing. Yeah, and it's like a
Yeah.
million people are gonna live in this tiny spot. Like that's bad if you're in it, but if you're not, then it's kind of good because look, we do have a population problem, not in the West, but in like the global South, for instance. And this is a very humane way to deal with it. It's like here's your Gooner glasses, go enjoy the rest of your life while your body rots away, and like reality. And this may seem very crass and very like mean or whatever, but it's a way to slowly weed out the kind of people that are going to be obsolete anyway in the future, and it's going to be a eugenic process of whoever has the will to actually want to be a part of the future will be enabled to, because now we're going to have way more resources available to the people who still do exist. So I mean, maybe I'll write an essay about it, Gooner accelerationism, but we'll see.
I did come to the same conclusions as you, because you're right. Like when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, okay, like although this is like bad for the people who like fall into it, like the real matrix shit, like being a goon or consuming content all day, whatever it may be. That's great for people who are agentic and like actually want to do things, right? Because there's more, I guess, like space or room for you. But also, like, on a more cynical side of things, you also have a consumer base that you can exploit to like drive about the changes that you want. That's horrible to say, but it's true.
We need to read. It's not horrible. It's a positive vision. They can call it horrible, but we're giving them what they want already, right? I mean, it's unfortunate. Oh no, but like, did you see, like for example, I actually had talked about this recently too. But like for example, like the North Korean soldiers who went to war in Ukraine, the minute they got iPhones, they were just like watching porn. Or like there was like a tribe in like the Yucatan Peninsula or something, and like they got Starlink for the first time, and of course they start vaping, watching porn, etc. So it's like it's sad, but at the same time, it's like it is kind of it's going to be an inevitability one way or another in some extent. And now, I mean, even taking like climate change, for instance, I don't think it's at the point now that's going to do anything, but it could definitely get to the point where these people might be wiped out by desertification in their home countries or whatever. At least this way, we can put them in these giant chambers, and then like they can goon the rest of their lives, and they'll be happy, like a cow's happy. But then hopefully, I would be so bold as to assume you and I would not get caught into Gooner accelerations. We'll be in the real life, suffering, being part of the irrational, but also creating beautifully into this like sort of new elite that emerges from that. You know what I mean?
No, and that's a very broad assumption too, that like we won't fall into that, right? Because I
Yeah,
have been
hopefully
finding
not.
myself lately like scrolling like X all day. And I'm like, oh my god. Or I was never a big TikTok person, but recently I downloaded TikTok, and I could like, dude, that thing is a Chinese psyop. It really is a Chinese psyop, because there's nothing like it. There's really nothing like it that keeps you entrapped all day. And I had to just delete the app, and it's like, damn, like if I'm cognizant of these forces, if I'm cognizant of the incentives behind these social media platforms, whatever it may be, and I'm still falling into it. I can't imagine what it's like for people who have no idea how like these things work.
Does that make you stronger in a sense too, though? Because like you have that, it's like kind of like a vaccine in a weird way. You know, you're slightly exposed to Gooner Accelerationism, but like we said, the North Korean guy was one shotted. The like Amish, like everyone
Mhm.
talks about the Amish, like they're resisting modernity. You put an Amish person in front of like a TV from the '60s, and they're gonna be like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think like in a strange way, we probably have the best chance, especially like I'm guessing you're around the same age I am. I'm like 24 because we grew up without too much technology, but just enough that we know what it's about. Because I think it's actually worse for like I don't know if you have any siblings, but I have younger siblings, and like I'm like I don't know if they're going to be able to resist this because they never had a moment in their life without technology. You know what I mean? Whereas like us, we have enough exposure, so it's like a vaccine, but then enough separation from that we know what life is like without it. And of course, you see like these tech elites, they're not letting their kids use technology when they're kids because they know exactly what psychologically it's going to do to them. You know what I mean?
I think that's so funny because I there's like a lot of I guess like dialogue around how people around our age, because I'm 25, so people around our age were born in the sweet spot where they're not like technologically literate, but we're also not so young that like we only know how to use technology via like iOS apps, which like a lot of younger kids only know how to like work an iPhone or work an iPad because they don't know how to use things outside of like apps that are specifically made for them and made to like make whatever they want to do simple. They never had to
Yeah.
download LimeWire.
I don't even know what the hell is WimeWire.
LimeWire? You don't know what
No,
LimeWire is?
I'm only a year younger than you. No, I don't know. What is that?
It's like a illegal software that we used to download back in the day to illegally download like MP3 and MP4 files. So like music and like movies and shows and shit.
I don't know. I had like my stepdad was in IT, so he just burned discs for me, or like he'd put them in these little
Uh,
oh, you know what's great? Heart thumb drive. What are they? Thumb drives? You remember?
oh, or yeah, like yeah,
USB sticks or
yeah,
whatever, and he
yeah.
would like download like 100 movies, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Now you have Netflix, and you have like thousands of movies for like $10 a month. It's crazy. It's like, gosh, now you're making me think of a bunch of weird stuff from, or even like you were like the Diary of a Wimpy Kids books popular when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Like, that was like gooning for like a kid at that age.
Uh,
I don't want to sound crass, but you know what I mean. Like that was like
that
a
was our
pleasure.
slop.
Yeah, but that like that kind of slop. At least you're reading. At least it's like a comic book. Now
Yeah.
the slop is just like I don't even know. Like it's just like totally. It's terrible. I guess that's all I'll say about that. It's yeah.
Mm. And I guess like to bring that back to consciousness now that I'm really thinking about it, and if we really do have a belief or a strong belief in hyperstition, what does it mean when this like large percentage of the world's population is like sucked into this kind of like um simple like primal way of being? Like when I scroll my phone too much, I say to myself like I'm being a monkey right now. Like this is monkey brain activity, like just giving into like like primal instincts of just like wanting to feel good all day. So you just like scroll, right? Um and so I really wonder, like, yeah, that'll make more space for people who get out of that and like want to like bring about real change. But will there be like mass effects of like this like large collective consciousness like being that way?
I think yes, inevitably, right?
Oh, the Gooner Accelerationism, right? Is that
Yeah,
what it is? That what?
basically. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, you gotta. All right, you can start using it, but you have to say that I came up with this. I don't want everyone to steal my word. I need to trademark that. Lease
I'm
it
go-
out.
I'll post about it
Yeah,
and I'll give you credit.
there we go. As long as I get credit.
Mm.
People have been totally loving it recently because I just came up with it last week, or that's when I introduced it in my last podcast. Everyone was
Mhm.
like commenting, like, "Ha, like, that's like the perfect explanation for it." Um, anyway, but yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree with that, and I guess to sort of bring this all together, um,
Mhm.
at a certain point though, like this only matters if Nick lands at least his early vision for the future doesn't happen. Because if his early vision is true, we can't do anything about it, and we're fucked
Oh, like an
regardless.
Inhuman world.
Yeah. Now, granted,
Yeah.
he has changed, like I say, softened his position a bit. And like I said, I mean to
Hmm.
talk to him about this and see what his like new perspective
Hmm.
is regarding it. But like if that's gonna happen, there's nothing we can do about it. But whatever we're talking about now is positing that alternative reality where we do have that agency still, let's say, still able to be exerted. And I think we do, because I mean I think the people that get really doomer about it, it's a sort of escapist fantasy. This is something Zizek talked about with Land's philosophy, and
Hmm.
I prefer Land to Zizek. I think Zizek's, he has some good stuff, but I much prefer Land. But what Zizek,
Isn't he a Marxist?
yeah, but it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense because he kind of, I don't know why he's a Marxist, because some of his ideas to me seem very like anti-Marxian. But I don't know. I got to read. I haven't really read Zizek much, but one thing he says about people like Land is like it's sort of this escapist fantasy, like, oh, we can't do anything, so you might as well like ride the waves. It's sort of like relinquishing our agency, and a sort of means of like it's almost like the sort of Buddhist middle path where it's like, life's not worth living. We're gonna eventually get to this point of moksha, and we're gonna get out of the
Mhm.
samsara, and we're gonna die. We're not gonna reincarnate anymore, and that's the meaning of life. It's
Yeah.
almost like you can attach that to this escapist idea that we aren't going to have agency in the future. But I guess where I'd conclude like that
Mm.
sort of tangent is that you know we still should only think of it as if we have agency, because that's the only future that we're going to have any say over. And then we should actually try to actively shape that future into being through, like I said, from my perspective, constructing artificial intelligence in a way where it will want to mimic or it will want to intrinsically seek the irrational. And that's kind of what I'd have to say about
Mm.
that.
I think we can hyperstition whatever we want. I
Based,
really do think so. Like, if we really want a certain future to come about, I don't think things are out of our hands. So I do believe that consciousness creates reality. And so if there's enough people making an active effort and almost kind of like brainwashing the rest of the population to like follow their ideologies, you can get the outcome that you want.
yeah, I mean that's my perspective too. Even if it turns out to be false, that's the only thing that's going to have any
Yeah.
bearing. So you might as well think that way, So yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think we covered a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
Were any sort of I guess either summations or other things you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, we spoke. We touched on the CCRU, but we didn't really speak much about like effective accelerationism.
We can kind of, yeah, we can like put
Yeah,
that as like our sort of last topic. If you could briefly introduce it
yeah,
to the legionaries.
yeah. It's kind of not an offshoot, but it's like the I would say, and some people disagree with me, that the origins of E-Acc, or effective accelerationism, comes from the University of Warwick, right? Like McLean, CCRU type people. They had accelerationism, and then from there, my friends, do you know like base Beth Jesus?
I know Jeff Bezos, but I don't know the based version.
So he's a friend of mine from Twitter, and he's like kind of like, if you search it up, like he's kind of like regarded as like one of the originators of effective accelerationism, and it's basically just like uh really radical like techno optimism. So just believing like no legislation against like innovation or building tech, especially when in regards to AI, and believing that whatever problems that we do have that came from tech can solve those problems. It's just like really radical like techno optimism essentially.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree completely with that. I do think there has to be an active shaping, an active, like even active hype, like exerting of a specific hyperstition. I think if you just let it go rampant, that is where you could get this sort of Landian future. I mean, to me, complete techno optimism sort of posits that this thing does have a telos going towards something positive. So, I mean, I don't think you could effectively legislate limitations on the development of artificial intelligence, but on like a, let's say, the designer level, right, the ground level of this sort of thing, I think you should sort of intentionally shape it in a particular way, because I think that is going to have ramifications. But again, like, what do I don't really know much about the technical side of things. I rely
Yeah.
on, you know, tech friends to sort of fill me in on these things. So I mean, I'm more dealing conceptually, I guess.
Yeah, well, Hyperstition is very ingrained in the E-Acc movement as well. So it's all about just like creating the narrative that you want, right?
Yeah. So what is so are you saying like the sort of techno optimism is like the main I guess tenet of
Yeah.
the acceleration for sure? How would you
Yeah, like
I don't know
yeah.
what are your thoughts though? Do you think we should just be techno optimists, or do you sort of see some sort of shaping force actively?
I was a big E-Acc girl. Like I was hashtag E-Acc on Twitter for a long time. Um, I kind of removed that from my bio only because I really want to believe in it. Like I do think it's probably the best mindset to adopt. I just don't know if it's 100% like accurate, I guess. But I do I am a fan.
Yeah, I guess I would have to think about it more because I don't really like. Are there any people who like write a lot? That I guess I don't know, does this guy write a lot? For instance, something I could like look at, like a Substack or anything, or anyone in the
I
E acceleration. It's good to read.
He used to write a lot. I can send you his articles, but I don't think he writes too much now, but he
Hmm.
definitely has like released some stuff in the past.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I guess one of my main problems with the sort of tech elite is I find them to operate from sometimes, not everyone, but a lot of them operate from this sort of resentful psychology. I think.
Mm.
I don't think
Of
that
like the
applies to.
natural world.
Yeah, I don't think this applies to
Mm.
everyone. But one of the things that like Bronze Age pervert talks about is that you can't have an IQ elite, because when you have an IQ elite, generally the people with like that are considered high IQ or in fields of high IQ. First of all, and I'm not saying this is true of everyone, because there's definitely a lot of people in tech who are very creative, but there is still a large subset of like tech that are sort of that or over scientific, over reductive, you know, sort of people. I don't know if it's Harari who's one of them, but there was like one of those similar types who very much to me resembles this. And one of the things that like both Bap and like Nietzsche says is we need a military state. And now I don't think we need a military junta, but I've always, I was in the military before, and I've always sort of like most of my, I guess a lot of my followers or whatever, I've been in the military, and I think that it does ingrain a very good ethic to sort of engage with these topics, um, because first of all, I think there needs to be this not just not just a creative impulse that is unlimited by reality, but one that is grounded in reality on a psychological level. So you take people in the military, for instance, and I didn't have any like combat experience or anything, but people that did, for instance, right? They deal with this very exhilarating and very both terrible and I mean even beautiful in some instances experiences, and I think it shapes their psychology in such a way, whereas when you have people that work more in the theoretical, and you see how they try to sort of bring about their ideas, even like someone like Immanuel Kant, for instance, like he never strayed. Like the famous story of Kant, like he like wakes up exactly at like I don't know 6 a.m. He has his breakfast, he goes for a walk, he comes back, he writes for 4 hours, he does the same thing, and then you see like he's a very brilliant thinker, but his philosophy, I don't really find it particularly true, right? It's an effective framework to build off of, but then it's really not good at the same time. Versus someone like Nietzsche, people want to say like, "Oh, Nietzsche died a sick, incel of syphilis." It's not true. Like this was a guy who was a veteran of a war. He would hike like nonstop through the Alps. He ate way too much fruit, which is terrible for you. Like he would eat bowls of fruit every day, and he got like stomach problems from it. But you see these thinkers who engage more in reality and outside the theoretical, and then their psychologically their works tend to reflect this lived experience, where I think a lot of these tech elite people tend to be like shut-ins and tend to not really have lived that sort of lifestyle psychologically that leads to a more like master morality, so to speak, in a very reductive sort of way to explain that. But I don't know, do you see that at all, or maybe you disagree?
No, absolutely, because I'm a New York girly, right? And people there are very creative. They're very I guess like exotic depending on who you're talking to. Even if they're in finance or tech, there's like a flair to them, right? And then when I go to SF, all like the engineers there, all the tech people, they're they don't know how to talk about anything besides work. Like everything is like, what are you building? This is what I'm doing. Um, when you talk to them, you see that they very much follow certain like systems and processes with everything that they do. There's no like, I don't know. I feel like there's no flair. They're kind of just like, I like tech robots. I don't know. I don't want to be like offensive, but but they really are like that. It's like they live and breathe that, and they very much do have like an engineer oriented mindset where everything has to be like formulaic, I guess.
And that almost goes back to our whole like irrational versus utility, right? Like they're sort of lacking in that irrational that I think only comes from lived experience. Because when you do live, like if you're programming something, I guess more or less you can sort of construct it in a way that's going to fit parameters. Where if you're doing something, I don't know, maybe stupid or crazy, like you're going to be confronted with the irrational in such a way that you start to see that positing from the irrational actually has a very, positive result. So yeah, I mean, I guess we're on the same page there. Yeah, yeah, Apollonian Dionysian, so to speak. I'm probably lacking in my tech knowledge. Maybe one day I'll get into that, but right now, my main focus is just philosophy because I find it more fun. I mean, I tried programming a bit because my dad's a software engineer, so like, I would fuck around with it a little bit in high school, but I never really got into it. But maybe one day, maybe one day I'll create the rogue AI, to bring about the destruction of mankind and accelerate. Just kidding.
I mean, you can always vibe code now too. So
What's vibe coding?
vibe coding is using AI agents to code for you, essentially.
I've I've done that a little bit, just like messing around, but I still feel like I need a better I still need a better foundational knowledge to use it more properly, you know? But yeah, that's totally true. I think that's another thing. I guess one of the things I'll close off with is one of the other positive things about Gooner Accelerationism is that with artificial intelligence, you're not going to need the technical skills anymore. It's all going to be what you can envision, right? And like as an artist, right? A lot of artists have to spend like 10 years just knowing how to hold their hand in a specific way. But now with like artificial intelligence and the outgrowths of that, you're going to be able to actualize whatever beautiful sort of construction you want to bring into being, bring into reality. And that's always been my white pill regarding artificial intelligence. Most people will be wiped out, not literally, but like, or wiped into their little Gooner caves or whatever and be stuck there for the rest of time. But for we few who can resist those urges and resist the dark embrace of the Gooner cave, maybe great wonders await us at the end. But any sort of final things you wanted to bring up?
No, no. Maybe that suffering is necessary.
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
Gunnar Act. Mhm.
Oh, what were you gonna say?
I say the Gunnar Act operates under the assumption that most people only want to feel good, right? Only want to engage things that are pleasurable. And so I think that suffering is almost necessary to create about beautiful things.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. Amor fati, the love of one's fate, and the love of a non-teleological fate that might suck at times, but just gotta keep
Yeah.
with it. And maybe it'll get better. It might not get better. So tough luck if
Yeah.
that's you, but maybe it does get better. But anyway, but yeah. So thank you, Legionaries, for watching. If you've watched this far, you'll get a Roman eagle delivered to your doorstep via drone. Um, Help bring about this hyper. We're in a hyperstition. What's the verb for hyperstition? Hyperstitize.
No, I think it's just hyperstition, honestly. We're going to hyperstition.
Okay, we're gonna hyperstition a new Roman Empire. Instead of like old legionaries, we're gonna have like these inorganic cyborg legionaries, which we are gonna become, and we're gonna colonize the universe and create a eternal cosmic empire. But anyway, thank you so much, Moons and Hues, for joining me.
Thank you.
And as always, thank you, legionaries, for watching. This is the Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the Warrior Philosophy. We'll see you next time. Ave Nova Roma.